Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Leslie Hawthorne, and I'm a program manager with Google's Open Source Programs Office. And we're privileged to have here with us today two founding members of the SilverStripe Content Management System project, Sigurd Magnusson and his colleague Sam Minnee, who will be joining us later for the Q&A. And Siggy is going to talk to us today a little bit about the SilverStripe Content Management System, their participation in Google's Summer of Code program, as well as anything else?
New Zealand.
And New Zealand. Over to you, Siggy.
Thank you. All right, well, I'm going to start this off by just saying thank you very much to Leslie and also Chris DeBona, who, we haven't done a whole lot of things together, but whenever there has been anything that we've done together, it might be an email, might be dinner, it's always very fun and it's always very productive, so thank you for that. All right, so I'm going to talk a wee bit, as Leslie mentioned, about New Zealand and some of the software that has come out of the country. I'm also going to talk a wee bit about, I don't know if Leslie circulated it, but going to talk about some Lord of the Rings stuff. Also going to mention some of the mistakes that we've made that you don't need to make, but also some mistakes that you should make. And as Leslie mentioned, we've had a fantastic run of Google Summer of Code. So I just wanted to share some of our experiences with that, so you got a feel for what has been produced, and also, again, just some of the lessons that we've learned. So, New Zealand. We've got 4 million people and about 100 square miles. So I was just up in OzCon last week, and it's quite a similar match. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything to relate it to in terms of California or San Francisco, but hopefully you've been to Oregon, so know what that's all about. Unlike America, which supposedly was settled tens of thousands of years ago, we were found very, very recently, which is quite nice, because when people find a country, they generally start killing everything and devastating it. So we've had a fairly short period of time in which to destroy our own country, so it's still quite pristine. It's quite nice. The European discovery was even more recent, and so from 1634 is when white people started to clamber over the place, and it basically led up to 1840, in which the treaty between the indigenous people, the Maori, signed and basically passed over their authority to the Queen of England. And that's basically when mass immigration began, mass to a 4 million point. The other interesting thing about New Zealand is we actually have real coffee there. I think, despite all of these wonderful attributes of civilization, I think America still has a little bit to learn there. Interesting as well, we also have a female prime minister, and before I go off and say that you should vote for Hillary or anything like that, I think it has helped, actually. I think it's quite nice. We've got quite liberal politics, and it does make for quite a nice place to live. As you can imagine, given that we're 10,000 miles away from everywhere, the economy is very reliant on export. And traditionally, because we were founded out of England, in terms of the Pākehā race, it basically just meant that we shipped off all of our goods to England, and that's really supported our economy. Now that there's a much more ferocious world economy, we've had to think a bit smarter. And so things that had typically been funding us with England have now been reduced. And so we're now into things like software, movies, Lord of the Rings. We were in Seattle last week, and we noticed that there was New Zealand wine for sale, things like that. So we're actually obviously getting up there. And as you know, it's a lovely place to visit. So I expect all of you to come to New Zealand after this presentation. So some of the things that New Zealand has done, it's quite a short talk, so I can basically just explain, one example in different kind of areas. So for instance, Jade is in the larger kind of education, sort of enterprise kind of area, and has been running for a decade or more. I guess more on the kind of entrepreneurial side of it would be a guy called Rod Drury who made a lot of money with aftermail. So after Enron, I believe there was legislation that meant that all emails had to be saved and preserved, so you couldn't just delete them and kind of erase, your history. And so aftermail stored all of your emails so that when there was a discovery process in the courts, they could go through all your emails and find you to be, guilty of some crime, stuff like that. So he made a lot of money after the whole Enron thing. And that then went into zero. So he's now doing a startup where he is producing a software as a service application for small businesses to run their accounting. So that's some pretty cool stuff. On a completely different tangent, there's an academic called Peter Gutman, And he's been working in the PGP world. He's been essentially helping refugees escape their countries in war-torn conflicts. It's quite neat, really. He's been able, basically, to save people's lives because people are saying, well, look, I need a little rendezvous point. The army's going to kill me kind of thing. Where shall we meet? And obviously, you don't want anyone to intercept that, so PGP has been used there. So that's quite cool. He also wrote the longest suicide note in history. He described Microsoft's DRM as the longest suicide note in history. So if you Google that phrase, you'll come up with a very long article that was on Slashdot probably about 6 months ago. So that was quite cool. Then again, another completely area is Plan HQ. They share our office back in Wellington in New Zealand. And that's another software as a service application that's very quickly making progress. And that's for small startups to be able to share information of the staff, the directors, the VCs, the investors, and so on about what the company is doing and so on. Because often with business plans and so on will get created and then just kind of thrown away and no one knew what was going on. So it's sort of like a base camp for starting up your own business, you know, that kind of idea. And again, there's a company in Wellington called Catalyst. And that's probably, along with us, one of the major open source organizations in New Zealand. And they regularly contribute to large open source projects like Moodle, which is a learning system, and Perl, and Mahara, which is interesting, is one that's actually been created in New Zealand rather than, say, Moodle and Perl, which are basically New Zealand examples of us contributing to larger, wider, more global projects. So I'm often asked, you know, what is a really nice example of how open source is used in New Zealand? So we're quite proud to say that the democratic process is actually run on open source. So Perl/Mason, in terms of the front end and the programming language, it's a web-based thing, basically ties in with Postgres. And so all of the people who are eligible to vote in New Zealand, it's all stored in the system. And so that's really, really cool. And then in terms of the voting, there are lots of elements of open source software used there as well. So that's really, really nice. And then finally, there's also another couple of people I know about, and that's us. And so at SilverStripe, that's our company with 18 people. We make our money from building websites. We've done that since 2000. But we spend about 20% of our time actually on the open source offering. And I guess just to give you a little bit of context, I will just spend, just a couple of slides on what the product is before launching into, I guess, more general information that will help you. So of my children, only one of them is a web-based open source product, and that's SilverStripe. As you can see, it's got quite a variation in terms of the actual design that it can do, and it's got an out-of-the-box CMS. So it's kind of 38-second overview is the fact that it's bigger than a blog. It does more than something that like WordPress might do, but yet it still retains some of the things like being able to just get it up and going. You don't have to construct the system itself. But at the same time, you don't have to sort of bash around for so long, as you might with larger, more heavyweight open source and closed source programs to kind of get it going. So it's a little bit like, one of the guys at OzCon was talking about how a lot of projects ended up kind of being like a big, small car truck. And we kind of see that, a lot of the problems with the CMS space are that they're just trying to do too much. And so we're trying to focus on this in-between space where people have just haven't really focused on and done very well. Another big differentiator, and this is something I'm going to tie into about how do you run an open source project, is that we have focused on the usability for the site manager. A lot of systems out there tied too much the development person and the site content manager together. And so you had an interface that wasn't really good for either. And as I mentioned, it's a system that both works out of the box, but it's really easy to customize. All right, so that gives you a little bit of context for the rest of my chat. So now I can move on to destroying the ring. So I did promise to talk about some of the Lord of the Rings things. And essentially, all of New Zealand participated in Lord of the Rings. If you weren't riding a horse in front of the camera, you were at least feeding the horse or making a costume for the horse or something like that. Pretty much everyone was either directly involved or had a friend who was or something like that. It was pretty cool. They had a very strict policy that you were not allowed to take cameras on to the set. So what I did was just run home with all the makeup on me and just take a photo of me at home. So that seemed to work all right. So yeah, I mean, essentially Sam and I, who are both actually extras on The Lord of the Rings, starred in this whole sequence twice. One, making billions of dollars, and then secondly, with our own product. I mean, because one of the major themes of Lord of the Rings was this whole notion that if you have too much power, then basically human race doesn't know exactly how to deal with it. You know, the greed kind of overwhelms you, and you really just, you know, you just abuse it, really, right? And so it was interesting when at OzCon there was this nice debate between Oracle and Alfresco, who, although, you know, Oracle's doing some open source stuff there, they were basically talking about, you know, one being very controlling, making a lot of money, and one being far more open and you know, providing a lot more liberty. And yeah, so we destroyed the ring. We decided that we didn't want to have, you know, all of this greed and power and so on. It was just going to kill us. We actually just wanted to destroy the ring and be open source. So I was just going to explain, you know, especially from a New Zealand perspective, because some of these things seemed a lot different than what was being mentioned at OzCon, as to why we would open source our product. So one of the key things about being in New Zealand is they're very far away from anywhere, and it's quite hard to get the rest of the world to learn about you. But it's also incredibly crucial because you quickly saturate the marketplace, right? It's the same size as an American city. So, you know, one of the key things that we established about a year ago was the fact that, well, we needed to advertise and get a whole lot of people on board. That was what we wanted to do. So if we actually advertise, I guess, with the product itself, rather than trying to bash everyone over the head with a baseball bat in terms of some promotions and billboards, then that's going to be really, really positive. It's going to be a lot cheaper. People are actually going to like what we've produced innately, rather than just enjoy our marketing campaign. And yeah, so it just really made sense that, I guess, as a channel to market, that we should open source the whole product. Another part to it is that, you know, the whole tool set that we created was the result of our everyday work. We didn't go off and decide to come up with some imaginary problem and then try to solve it and then market that. We've produced a couple of hundred websites, and every time we built a site, we would kind of stub our toe on some problem. It would be kind of too complex to make a design in this way, or it took too much time to create a database in this way, or something like that. And so over time, we made a toolkit. And so I guess, you know, what we had a few years ago was not worlds apart from what we have today. And, you know, so back in 2004, Tim, the CEO of SilverStripe, and myself, we went around knocking on doors saying, hey, we've built this beautiful toolkit, we've made 100 sites in it, you should buy it off us. And the feedback was very, very positive. I got very excited. We'd come home from, you know, from work and be very excited, all this positive buzz. People wanted to use the product, they wanted to learn all about it. But they basically didn't want to give us any money for it. And so that caused us a problem, and it really confused us, because people would be saying, looking us in the eyes and saying that they loved the product, but they wouldn't get their wallet out, and they were just completely contradicting themselves. And so the problem was not so much the product itself, wasn't the spark, it was what was around it. And specifically for SilverStripe, it was the problem about the licensing structure and the cost. So the cost, you know, if you're making websites, you're web developers are generally very shrewd. They don't want to part with a lot of money. They're used to a whole lot of free tools being available, so they didn't see the reason to spend money on a tool, even if it was a lot better than the free ones out there. Secondly, they also were used to the freedom that open source provides in terms of things like PHP and HTML and JavaScript. You can always just look at what everyone else has built in terms of their sites. You can rip it apart. You can just have a field day. And so for us to try and make money off it and kind of lock it down also just didn't work with them. Another aspect of you know, why we decided to kind of destroy this whole ring was, you know, we were in debt. So I'd been using open source software since, I don't know, more than 10 years ago. I tried to get Quake running on my 486 so I could frag people. And everyone else had Pentium, so it was fine for them, but my Microsoft box just didn't play well. So in trying to get Quake running on my machine, I therefore had to learn everything about Linux. I already knew how to do some programming, and I already loved the internet and stuff like that. So I now had, you know, experience in internet and in Linux. And, you know, so it all just kind of gelled together. So just naturally was a really nice, I guess, set of tools for us to found the company and to put our experience into. And after several years of using all of this software, we really felt that we were just taking all of this food away from the soup kitchen and not kind of giving anything back to the community. So SilverStripe was a nice way of giving back. Another aspect of it was this whole notion of violins. So I went on this quite cool road trip with my dad. My dad knows way too much about violins, but one of the interesting things was this wonderful analogy that we formulated between violin making and open source software. And basically, up to about the 1800s, all the violins were being created were basically created out of a guild kind of system. So you'd have a master and apprentice. They'd be working very collaboratively, but at the same time competing for commissions, right? After the 1800s, there was ferocious, it became very, very popular, and so there was very, very strong the desires for all the companies and so on to produce these, and it just commoditized. And so the quality went really, really down because they were competing completely rather than collaborating. And so if you ask a lot of the, the major violinists of the day now, most of them are trying to still get instruments pre-1800. It's only more recently that people have been beginning to collaborate again after realizing that the commoditization of the violin destroyed it. So yeah, it's a nice reminder to us in the software world. If we go for 150 years just competing too much, we'll basically have this kind of nuclear cold winter of software. So I've already talked a bit about the freedom. So some of the surprises, well, we didn't find Liv Tyler in all of this. But we did get some very satisfied staff. I think that was one of the really nice things. I mean, you'll appreciate this at Google as well. When we were just making websites for people, it was difficult for the junior staff, or most staff, to really get lots of nice little bits of praise. Now that we're open source, people can just make patches. It's very clear what people are doing. And for instance, we've got a guy who's still in his university. He's created most of the tutorials for SilverStripe. And everyone that has downloaded SilverStripe goes through his tutorials, and so he gets lots of praise. And so that's a really, really nice situation to be in. As I mentioned, there's not a lot of other open source stuff going on in New Zealand, and so it was quite novel. And so we got a lot of TV, radio, newspaper, advertising, basically, promotion. And so that tied greatly into our whole desire for open source to work with us and actually promote the company. And yeah, I mean, we've been invited to OSCON and here today, so it's been really, really cool. All right, so we'll talk a wee bit about some of the things that we've learned in terms of managing people on an open source project. Firstly, one of the things I seriously recommend to everyone that's involved in open source is this Bible. It's by Carl Vogler. I understand that actually Leslie was parading him around here just quite recently, but I basically read his book online, which is producingoss.com, in about 24 hours. It was fantastic. There was nothing I disagreed with. It was all just beautiful. So I hope that he continues to keep it updated, as years go by. It's really, really great. Okay, so one of the big challenges we had was that we didn't have a definitive roadmap, right? A lot of open source projects are like this. You have some ideas and desires, you have a big to-do list, but you don't have, kind of quarter one, quarter two, quarter three roadmap explaining intimately what's going to be done each time. So one of the things that we found worked really, really well was basically just publishing some guiding principles. So what I mean by that is there were things that we already felt were very true, but we just hadn't, for whatever reason, articulated them. And as the other developers and contributors found out these things, it worked very well. So for instance, some of the Google Summer of Code students started introducing fairly technical fields and ideas into the CMS in terms of the interface. And so I put a post in our forum saying, okay, well, one of the big things we wanted to do with the CMS was make it very simple for a communications or marketing person, not a developer, to use the CMS. And so some of these sorts of guiding principles are very useful to publish there in lieu of a roadmap. And so they should be the differentiators of your project. They should be basically the reasons that your product is in existence, right? Why is your product different? Why is it solving that person's pain? And so you don't need to be incredibly detailed. and spell every tiny little detail out for people contributing on the project if you kind of give them these major kind of guidelines as to where to be. And a point, like these things should exist already. You shouldn't just go, oh, okay, well, what will these be? Like, you should already have aspects about your project that are already the reason that people are choosing it, right? So you're really just articulating stuff that already exists. Another big thing is giving recognition. And in general, I'm talking about doing that in public. If I say to you, hey, look, you've done a really, really good job, just to you personally, and confide that in you, you might smile and that might be great. But if I say to a whole group of people or put it on a mailing list or something like that, that this person has done a fantastic job, then he realizes that I kind of just said that to everyone else and that it's actually quite a rare treat and that I actually do appreciate it and things like that. And so that's a really, really nice reward for contributing and helping someone along. It also can be used as a motivator, right? But you do need to be specific about what the praise is. So rather than just saying, hey, look, thanks to Hayden, you should say specifically kind of what the work was and why it was useful and things like that, so people kind of know what it was, what they can replicate and get more praise. Or let's say, very dear to our heart with Google Summer Code, you might have a bunch of people who are working fantastically, and then you've got a couple of people who just kind of need to be pushed along. And so if you've got some specific praise and you're giving recognition to a bunch of people, then the people who are not really, contributing as much as they should be, kind of can look over there and go, all right, well, I can see exactly what these people have done. I can see exactly what they've been praised for. I just need to emulate that, and then I'm going to be in that whole tide as well. And I guess just another point there is, just make sure you balance it, right? It's kind of like raising kids. You don't want to say, great, you've done a good job for everything, because then it dilutes it. But at the same time, you do need to say it enough. Otherwise, they just get depressed or they just leave and that kind of stuff. Another point, and this is quite specific to Google Summer Code as well, is just how we delegated work. So this is just a balance between saying, hey, look, you guys go off and just build us something cool, versus, I guess, micromanaging and coming up with this really detailed plan and then every day being too involved. So what worked for us really well was that I specifically kind of created a one-page overview of what the project should be like, and I did that in collaboration with the students so that I didn't just go, here you go, this is what you're doing. So it was still a collective activity, but the point is that it fitted on the page. That's about the amount of detail that was in this, sort of a 2-3 month project. The other aspect there is that because it's an open source project, you can't rely on one person answering these questions. So that the students are going to always have lots of questions, especially at the start, especially at the end. And it's too much to ask of one person to answer all the day-to-day questions. So we try and throw it out to the community. Set up a forum or some kind of activity so that all of these questions get funneled to a group of people who can then respond and so on. And so it might mean that the answer is not absolutely accurate or that kind of thing straight away. But as an average, it's going to work far better than, let's say, saying, well, if all the correspondence should go to this one person, and if that person's busy for a week, then what happens, And as I mentioned, there was this one page, but then if we kind of add some of these guiding principles, such as, the product is designed so that the CMS is only really there for the site manager. It's not really there for the developer. If you have some of those kind of bullet points that are global to the whole project, then people, when they're doing their code, they kind of know what the parameters are that they were trying to work within. So Leslie likes to talk about herding a lot, so I thought I could have a little mentor herding slide. Again, one of the things that we really tried to do was just take the work off them, right? So try and get them to do the smallest amount but the greatest amount that they can. So if there's someone that just knows a fantastic amount about databases, well then great. So if you've got a database abstraction layer or something you're trying to create, well then these people should be married together. But try and get the very tough, challenging questions directed at this mentor, and then just everything else, try and spread that out, because this person, this mentor, is going to be very important to the organization that they're working for or whatever, and they're going to have a very small amount of time. So if they are doing any mentoring, you want to make sure that they are completely and 100% the most suitable person for answering that question, and they're just they're not just answering silly questions like setting up email or anything like that. All of that stuff needs to be pushed off them. Another point about the mentoring is that, try and actually get them to have a lot of fun, right? So I tried to make sure that the mentors were working on projects that they were interested in, so that when the projects got finished, they would go, great, well, I made this really cool thing, and that's dear to my heart. And it also just meant that it was easy to give praise because they were interested in it, and therefore they'd be doing a whole lot of cool stuff, and so it just made this nice synergy. So it's important not just to concentrate on the students having a good time, but also the mentors. All right, so a little bit about mistakes. So the mistakes that I'm really kind of talking about relate to the design process of our application. So, the biggest thing for us was that we were building sites, we knew of a problem, and we were trying to fix that. So we knew what all the issues were. We weren't really trying to go out on a limb and just try and fix issues that didn't exist. It all ties back to Paul Graham's, fix problems people have, or whatever that is. So the big thing for us was that we would spend a lot of time carefully going, well, how should we implement this feature? How should we make it reusable? How should we make it fast? Or whatever the parameters were. And to a certain degree, you certainly do need to think those through. But you also have to expect that after a couple of years, all of these great decisions you've made in aggregate will still end you up with a system that is a bit of a throwaway, right? Just because software moves so quickly, there's always new ways of doing things. And so while day to day you're always making really, really smart decisions, over the course of several years, you will have made a product that basically has reached the end of its lifetime and you need to start again. But importantly, you have actually accumulated a wealth of information. So for us, back in 2005, after 5 years of making the first toolkit, we had an immense amount of information so that when we produced a second version of it, and when we also looked at the other mistakes and issues and things that were out in the marketplace, we could produce a much, much better system. All right, well, I thought I would show you some of the stuff that has gone into Google Summer of Code. All right, so the first guy I was going to talk about was Laksan Pereira. He's from Sri Lanka. He's been doing a whole lot of cool stuff with mashups. And so at the start of his project, we talked about making it really nice and easy for things like Flickr and YouTube and Technorati and all those kind of web services to try and get that content playing around and into the system. And so we're about halfway through the whole project. So what I can show you are things that are now currently working. And so at the moment, you can easily add a gallery of Flickr photos to your site. You can download this code. So that is showing O'Reilly Oscon stuff. You can do the same thing for Technorati. And so in the second half of the project, it's more a case of doing the same thing with YouTube and then just tying it up and boxing it up together properly. So you can download the source code and have this stuff playing on at the moment, but there's still a little bit more work to get it to a 1.0 kind of status. Another point about our project is the fact that we listen very hard to what people want. So one of the biggest surprises we had, something that we didn't really have on our roadmap, was internationalization, right? But it was definitely the most concentrated single request. So, it wasn't necessarily the majority of requests, but if we kind of tallied all the requests together, that would be the biggest lump. And so it was clear to us that we needed to get someone working on this. So we've now got SilverStripe running in Spanish there. So the internationalization stuff is interesting because, one, you have to make it update all the labels and that kind of stuff. But then you also need a system to manage it. So let's say, like one of the other projects is going to add a new feature to rotate images. So let's say that we've translated 6 languages, but then add this extra feature. We now have to go back through the languages and actually add rotate image in 6 different languages. So you need a nice system to be able to handle that, and you want preferably a system that a technical person isn't utilizing, it's someone that just knows these languages. So yeah, we've got the Google Summer Code student working on both of those. We've also got some quite cool stuff happening with usability. We had Elijah from Alabama. We actually met up with him in Portland, which was really great because we'd never met any of these people. And we've come up with some quite nice ideas here, and I think a lot of these sorts of things I really want to openly share because I'd like to see some of these things incorporated into other applications. So one of the things we've got here is drag and drop file manipulation. So by the way, SilverStripe's all under the BSD license, so you can download this stuff and copy it and use it. We want the whole web to be better, so definitely do that. And then we've also got the whole kind of notion that, see how it's red background on the buttons? So like if you're about to do an action that could potentially be a little dangerous, then sort of letting the user know softly. And it's the same kind of way of like, if you're getting a cup of coffee out of a microwave, it's steaming, right? So you know that maybe you should sort of exercise a little bit of caution about touching the object. You're not going to be kind of prompted to go, well, do you really want to touch the coffee? It's hot. So try and provide subtle cues so that you don't add obstacles, but just kind of insight into the actions. I'm sure Lefty will like this one. This one's all about Google AdWords and sitemaps. So this is a guy, we also met Will Scott from Seattle. And so basically we were just integrating the system so that you can type a phrase into SilverStripe, and it just integrates very nicely. So the page that you're editing will be featured as a Google AdWord. And just kind of simplifying the process so that you don't have to be in one application and go into the other one and back and forth. Try and get it in the same place. We also had an interesting project with Google Maps. And so I really wanted to know what the community of SilverStripe looked like. And I thought that this would be something that most communities would also like to know. So if you've got a forum, you want the people who are signing up to the forum to indicate where they are, and then you see a geographical representation of them. Fortunately, I've actually got the OpenID screenshot showing right there. Another project that we were doing was all about PDO, which was SilverStripe worked with MySQL, but we wanted to get to work with a whole lot of other different things, with different databases like Postgres, like Microsoft SQL Server and stuff like that. And so Philippe was working for the last 6 weeks, basically evaluating all the different database extraction frameworks out there that are available to PHP. And so we chose the PHP data objects. And in the second half of the project, he's actually coding it up. So that's really awesome to see. Another part of the system, and this again is what you should be doing, I feel, the bane with usability with open source projects is the usability generally, right? That's the problem that the whole Linux desktop has suffered. And in manipulating our own site, I found that I was often having to manipulate a photo outside of the application. I wanted to be able to rotate and crop within the application. And so as part of streamlining some of the general use cases of SilverStripe, we got Matthews from Poland to do that. And interestingly, one of the great conversations I had with Matthews was the fact that, the $4,500 that he got for that actually was equivalent to a whole year's salary in Poland. So that was really marvelous. So then we had another American. That was Quinn. He was doing a whole lot of reporting stuff. So we were using a bunch of non-flash or image compositing components to produce a whole lot of nice graphical reporting systems in SilverStripe. Because basically we wanted to make it so that if you had some data in a system, you're basically like a forum in your website, and you wanted to know how much the membership was growing or something like that. You wanted to be able to just have a couple of lines of code to actually produce that graph. You just wanted to say, well, look, here's a SQL query, or here's an object, or something like that. And so that's what Quinn's up to. We also appreciate the fact that Apple has come out with a new browser, and specifically version 3, because it fixed up a lot of JavaScript and HTML and CSS problems. And so SilverStripe was fundamentally now working with Safari 3. As it now does with a lot of other web applications that are quite rich in Ajax and things like that. So we've got Meg here just working through a whole lot of HTML, CSS, JavaScript issues that remain. And so at the end of her project, it'll now work in IE and in Firefox and in Safari 3. And if we're lucky, perhaps even Opera. All right, so we've got Marcus from Italy, and he's been working on OpenID. And this is something which I'm really, really excited about, actually, because one of the problems we had was the fact that we would be trying to log in and administer hundreds of websites that, on behalf of our clients. And so if we had usernames and passwords that we'd manually set up, well, then sometimes they'd be different. Or if a new staff member came on or left, they suddenly had access just to way too much of, of the sites and so on. So with OpenID, we can basically say, well, all of you sites, there's a single log-on for administrative access to all of those. And if one of our staff members leave, then we can just change the password of our OpenID account. And so the existing staff can now log in and still have access, but the person who's left no longer does. And that can also be applied to several different layers of access. So you might have an OpenID for administrative or just normal site content management. So as of now, you can log into the administrating system with OpenID, and by the end of the project, you will be able to use OpenID to sign up to the forum and stuff like that using SilverStripe. So if you have a SilverStripe-powered forum, you don't have to mindlessly type in all of your usernames and passwords and your date of birth, whatever else that the site owner wants you to pass over. You can just say, hey, look, I've got an OpenID account. Just suck all that information into my account. And that's really good, because I must have over 100 places where I've typed in and signed up and registered for things. And so I'm looking forward over the next 12 months to a world where a lot more sites are using OpenID, so I don't have to keep on providing that information.
So who hosts them?
Who hosts what? Sorry?
The OpenID. Where does that get? I'm not familiar.
All right, so OpenID is a distributed, authentication system. And so basically, there are two things. There are providers, or I guess kind of like directories of usernames and passwords, I guess, if you want to think of it like that. And then you have a whole lot of sites or systems that want, want permission from users to gain access. And so in this example here, I've got myopenid.com. So there are free places where you can just sign up for an account. And then basically you type in your URL. It's a little bit like an email address, right? Like the front bit says, well, this is my username, and then the last bit essentially kind of says, well, where should I go off and authenticate? And I guess it could be a little bit like, with Google, you have the Google accounts. So I could say that I've got an eBay store, and so long as, if I'm logging into eBay, so long as I can kind of get it to authenticate into the Google account, then I'm allowed into eBay. It's the same thing, except that the provider of the authentication mechanism is completely open. All right, and so those are actually the 10 projects that we've been working on. Some of the lessons that we've learned so far are, I think we've been pretty lucky with the students that we've picked, but I think one of the main reasons that that's true is I had a very stern requirement that they all had to give me code, and that the code they gave me all had to fulfill the same request. So basically, I asked them to make a browser poll. What's your favorite browser? So it had to basically ask some questions in HTML. It had to have a little bit of JavaScript validation in there. It had to be in HTML and CSS that was compliant. It had to be in PHP. It had to, tell the person to put the information into a MySQL database. So it was kind of like, there was 100 different things you wanted to know about this developer, and I just asked a very trivial question about all of them so that I could, for instance, say, well, this guy has just made beautiful object-oriented PHP 5 code, but the design is appalling. Okay, well, let's get him to do something in the back end. Or this guy, say like Quinn, had just blew me away with all of these graphs. So I was just totally taken aback. I was like, well, we just have to get him to do something with graphing. This is just incredible. So it really just kind of solicited their strengths and weaknesses so I could match them up with a good project and ultimately, indicate whether or not they should be in the program at all. And so that's kind of where, the good projects thing. So trying to match skills and stuff like that. One of the things that is quite challenging at the moment for us is the problem with interdependency. So if you've got, we've got a guy who was working on Google Maps, and we've got another guy on OpenID and stuff. So if we wanted to ever kind of start getting these things to work together, there's an interdependency problem. So I think in general, you try and keep them separate so that if someone doesn't, participate properly or is slow or something, It's not going to have an adverse effect on anyone else. Point that Leslie's made time and time again. It's all about just starting the coding early. And I think if the opportunity to do this again, then we're going to make that very, very clear. Because you can always sort of slack off, but it's very hard to kind of catch up. And I think, on that note, one of the good things we've done, like probably about 50% of the projects which I've shown you, about half of them, they've actually got code available for download now. And so we made a fairly kind of arbitrary choice about which one was in or not. But basically, we wanted to get some of it out the door so that we could find out some of the problems straight away. It would have been unmanageable if we'd tried to release everything in its sort of 0.1 release straight away. But at the same time, it would have been really, really bad to try and get everything so-called kind of rock solid and then release it, because then we wouldn't have learned some of the problems. So for instance, we needed to make some code available so that a module can detect if another module exists, that kind of thing. So there were all these little technical things that kind of popped up through the releasing of the code early, and so it was quite healthy to do that. Yeah, and lastly, it was just really, really exciting. It was really, really cool to have all of these people just completely transform our project and just make it twice as good as what it was. So yeah, if you've got questions, it has to stay away from our sports, because I don't know that. Other than the fact that when I flew over on the plane, I was watching a movie, and every kind of 30 minutes, the pilot would pause all of the communications and everything like that, and it'd say, hey, look, the score's like 5-0 or something like that. And I'd be like, I didn't even know a game was on, but I definitely knew the game was on after my movie was interrupted 6 times. So we did win a rugby game recently. I don't even know what it was, but yeah. Do you have questions about about New Zealand, about SilverStripe, about managing open source teams or code and stuff like that?
So what pays the bills now that you've open sourced the product?
All right, so who pays our bills? Well, as I kind of mentioned, initially what we were doing, up to about a year ago, we were closed source, and so we were building websites for people, right? And so even today, to this day, that's still true, but there's, I guess, 2 categories. There are people who are downloading our free tool and maybe wanting a bit of support, or perhaps just wanting a whole site being built or that kind of thing. And then, there are more local customers back in Wellington who want websites, right? So Wellington's the capital city, so you have small business, large business, and then you have government. So you've got a nice diversity of people who don't know anything about websites, but need websites. So that's paying our bills definitely in the short term. One of the big things we wanted to do with open sourcing the product was get a lot more people using it, and that really opened the door for us to come up with complementary products and services. So we're looking into ways of, for instance, with our free e-commerce module, looking at ways of saying, well, is there ways that we can have commissions, or can we kind of host this, and doing things like that, where you need to part with money anyway as the person using the system. So given that we've given the code to you, is there a way that's fair and equitable for you to give us some of that? Finally, we're also looking at other complementary products that we can produce, possibly in a SaaS model and things like that. So the first stage for us really was just trying to get people to learn about us and to love our product. Yeah. Okay, again.
So how widespread do your customers end up being?
Widespread?
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of local customers. You're open source, you're on the internet. Do you get customers that are outside your time zone?
Okay, right. Okay, so the question is, do we have customers geographically dispersed? So for the most part, no, because for the service-based business of directly building a website for people who aren't, say, so technical, it's quite difficult to work in different time zones and across countries when you can't meet face-to-face. But that is changing in terms of the developer community. So we're getting lots of inquiries. Like I was just answering the phone yesterday to some guy down near Florida was ringing up and saying, hey, look, I've seen your whole tool. I want you to kind of be in partnership with me so that I can kind of fire you the difficult questions and so on like that. Other than America, there's not a lot of interest, and I think that's just sort of representative of, I guess the American economy in terms of, like there's a lot of where the IT industry is and stuff like that. But I mean, we've had, over 15,000 downloads and lots of people actually being self-sufficient and using the tool. So that's probably, I guess, more of a nice positive comment on the documentation and stuff like that, and the forum and IRC and things, yeah. But I mean, I think one of the points is that it's still fairly early days, right? Because February was when we made the stable release. So that's what, 6 months, because it's the 1st of August now. So yeah, so I mean, I think that it's definitely growing, but people are wanting to use it and play around with it a lot more. And I mean, we've had steady growth to the traffic and stuff like that. So it's definitely working, yeah. Leslie.
I'd like to know why Sam hasn't joined you for the Q&A.
Sam, come up. You can join us for the QA.
Hi, everyone.
There's a 4-second delay, Mr.
4-second delay, and now I'm on.
So Sam is the CTO of SilverStripe. He's the brainchild behind all of the code. So while I actually showed him the PHP language just on its cusp from 3 to 4, it didn't take many years for him to completely supersede my abilities and stuff like that. So I've had to kind of bow down to his godlike stature in that regard.
Thank you for the introduction.
So we've got any perhaps technical questions about, I don't know. I mean, Sam did a talk at OSCON on ending Rails envy in PHP 5. So I don't know if there's anyone out there who wants to know about that. But
Talk about
WebStock. All right. So another thing that I'm involved in New Zealand is an outfit called WebStock. So there are about 5 or 6 of us who have spearheaded this whole web standards movement in New Zealand. And we put on a conference about 2 years ago, and there's another one coming up early next year in New Zealand. And the focus is very much on web standards, about making elegantly engineered websites. So yeah, we brought a whole lot of people like Doug Bowman and Kelly Goto and things like that to our country and basically created the first major web conference in New Zealand. And it was a lot of fun. It was very motivating, very inspirational for everyone that turned up. And I basically kind of encourage anyone that's in a position to bring, I guess, inspiration and ideas and so on to your community to do so, because there was nothing really happening like that in New Zealand, so it was very, very good for us to basically say, hey, look, well, instead of just looking at blogs and so on and reading books about how to make better websites that are accessible or, that kind of stuff, let's actually get you in the same room with some of the experts and stuff like that.
One of the interesting things about working on this kind of stuff in New Zealand is the development community is pretty small and tight-knit. And so if you start something, it's quite easy to really get everybody, in, say, Wellington or New Zealand excited about it and get everybody really on board. And so rather than just being yet another conference, it's like the conference this year. And that does have a lot of benefits.
Yeah.
Coolest conference shirt ever.
Yeah, we got feedback from Kathy Sierra about the fact that we actually made a different size for girls and stuff like that. So I think there's a question at the back.
What do you think about New Zealand's security policy on the internet? They just passed a law that you can't satirize the parliament. So when other countries satirize the parliament, are you allowed to access those sites on YouTube? Or?
Yeah, so the question's about New Zealand recently passed some laws about the fact that you can not satirize government. I haven't really followed it too closely, but my understanding is the fact that what the law has actually done has kind of opened it. I think there were even more draconian rules that basically existed before the internet was around, and now that the internet exists, the law sort of became a bit dysfunctional. And so they said, well, this is a bit silly, let's try and make this a bit more sane. I don't know, I mean...
The law was more targeted at producers rather than consumers of content, so I believe...
As long as it's not produced in New Zealand, they don't care.
Yeah, if it was produced in New Zealand and hosted offshore, I'm not sure. I don't know enough about the details, but it's not China.
Yeah, I think in general the fact that as a country and as an economy, we don't really care too much about that. So you would have to be quite slanderous and probably quite unjustified and really kind of, I guess, cause defamation for it probably to really be invoked. I don't think just making a bit of a mockery about a politician, which happens every split second, would really, really cause too much alarm. Thanks.
What are you guys looking forward to for Summer Code next year?
Well, we'd love to be part of the program again next year. It's been really great. I'd say that we're looking really to grow the CMS into more of a framework, more of a platform for a wider variety of projects. And so in the 9 months between the end of the one session and the beginning of the next, we'll probably be looking at ways of how can we get everyone collaborating on a platform rather than adding more and more features to a CMS tool that would, if we did that, become increasingly bloated. So it'll probably be more about getting lots of people involved in developing various add-on modules for the system, because frankly, the number of add-on modules we have compared to other CMSs, we could stand to improve there. So that'll probably be our focus.
Yeah. I think in general as well, we would be looking at whatever is topical at the moment. So at the moment, OpenID is something which I think is really fantastic. There'll be things happening in 6 to 9 months that will be just fantastic to do that really haven't been conceived yet. So it'll be a case of seeing, where the product has gone and where people, what people want, because we definitely want to make sure that, what we're doing is completely relevant at that time and to what people desire.
Maybe silly, but
Yeah.
does New Zealand get an advantage being sort of the first country on the new day?
I think New Zealand does get an advantage being the first country in the day. We definitely get a lot of tourism at the start of the year. I think everyone flocked to New Zealand when there was a new millennium, except I think it was cloudy.
The time zone differences, there have been companies who have tried to effectively work while the rest of the economy is sleeping, and then deliver stuff complete when they wake up the next morning. And that has seen some success. Obviously, it's questionable whether the disadvantages of the time zone difference don't outweigh that, but people explore the opportunities given to them in interesting ways.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much, guys.
Cool.
Thanks for inviting us.